Selma. It's amazing to me that this is really the first major motion picture about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. There have been documentaries, TV movies, and whatever this is, but no theatrical narrative features until now. Much like Steven Spielberg's Lincoln from 2 years ago, which focused not so much on Lincoln's life, but on the passage of the 13th Amendment, Ava DuVernay's Selma focuses on the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which I guess makes it more aptly titled than Spielberg's movie. In 1964, Dr. King, played by David Oyelowo, was already a world-renowned civil rights leader, as the film opens with him receiving his Nobel Peace Prize. At this time, millions of black citizens were being illegally denied their right to vote by white registrars, particularly in the South. Dr. King meets in the Oval Office with fellow Southerner President Johnson, played by Tom Wilkinson, asking for official federal legislature allowing black citizens to register to vote unencumbered. When President Johnson contests that he has more pressing matters at hand, like his war on poverty, Dr. King travels with his team to Selma, Alabama.
Dr. King, this thing's just gonna have to wait.
It cannot wait.
You got one big issue, I got 101.
Selma it is.
They assemble a large crowd to non-violently march to the registrar, but a fight breaks out with police, resulting in the arrest of Dr. King and others. Dr. King's presence captures the attention of Alabama Governor George Wallace, played by Tim Roth, who publicly denounces the movement. Governor George Wallace meets with the colonel of the Alabama Highway Patrol, and they plan to use the cover of night to hide the use of brutal force on a planned upcoming march. In the wake of this awful violence, Dr. King's team plans a 50-mile peaceful march from Selma to the Capitol in Montgomery, Alabama. I didn't see Selma until after the Oscar nominations were announced, so amidst all the talk of how much it got snubbed, I didn't really know what to think because I hadn't seen it yet. Having seen it, the fact that Ava DuVernay got passed over for Best Director in favor of Morton Tildum is a joke. And while I could definitely make the same argument for David Fincher or Damien Chazelle, at the very least, DuVernay is among several directors who did much more impressive work than one of the nominees. David Oyelowo.
It's actually Oyelowo. Don't try. Don't even go there.
I don't know what's going to happen.
No,
I really don't know what's going to happen. I had a...
Let's stick with Oyelowo.
David Oyelowo is great too, but honestly, there's not a bad performance in a movie full of performances. Especially Tim Roth. I realize there's some tough competition this year, but I can't help but feel it deserved more than the Best Song nomination, which feels like a consolation prize. I praise the movie for seriously making me uncomfortable. And not just because watching defenseless and innocent people getting beaten makes me uncomfortable, and not just because I know the stuff actually happened, but because it made me empathize with the characters. It made me picture myself in their shoes. It made me ask myself what I would have done in their situation. And I felt helpless. The movie's never afraid to show you what's at stake here. And when it does so, the scenes are visceral and intense. Yes, it hits the beats you think it will hit with this type of story, but there are also moments when it punches you in the gut. And then it steps back and lets you catch your breath, and then it punches you in the gut again. That's the difference between Selma and another Best Picture nominee, The Imitation Game. The Imitation Game also had enormous stakes, probably bigger stakes, but you never really feel them the way you do in Selma. Selma grabs the audience and shakes them until they care about the events happening on screen. The Imitation Game kind of implicitly assumes you're interested. One thing I said about Steve McQueen's 12 Years a Slave is that it really made the viewer see slavery. It's one thing to learn about it and to read about it and say, yeah, that was bad, but to actually see it, to be shocked by it, that's something else entirely. You have that here. You can talk about the civil rights movement of the 1960s, and you can read about it, and you can say, yeah, those were brave people. But here you actually see specifically what they went through, what they were up against. And while 12 Years a Slave was certainly hard to watch, at least you had the comfort of knowing that those things were happening 150 years ago, and you could, in a way, distance yourself from it. This movie shows things happening 50 years ago, and there could be more movies showing this kind of thing happening much more recently than that. On top of that, you get some insight into one of the most influential figures in American history. Just as I said about Lincoln, I'm always interested to learn about the man behind the idol, what he was like as a person, what he was like in private. The movie opens with Dr. King talking to his wife Coretta before the Nobel ceremony, and their relationship, and the strain that the movement put on it, is returned to throughout the story. We all know how Dr. King could stand in a microphone and command the attention of tens of thousands, but it's just as interesting to watch him control a room of 10 people. Not with his grand oration, but with his conviction, his confidence, his empathy. You see that when he speaks with the president. You see that when he comforts a man who lost his son to police violence. This country is lucky to have had a man like Dr. King. And as someone who places probably too much societal importance on the films that we choose to make, I'm glad we finally acknowledge that with a movie. And a good one at that.